I'll get started. Hello and welcome everyone again to our series of talks with Norman Klein that focus on LA and the various questions that we have around cities post-pandemic, but also Los Angeles in the run-up to the election, which is a sort of backdrop to our discussions, although we're not focusing on that or talking about that directly. Last week, we discussed in some detail scripted space, and this week again, I'm going to spring another general theme on Norman that I haven't warned him about. He has no idea what I'm going to throw at him, but today I thought it might be interesting to talk about this very notion of the history of the future, because the history of the future is or the future a history is something that we started talking about some years ago. And I remember quite well one time when Norman was over when you were over in London, and you were over for a potential exhibition at the V&A, and there was a sort of focus group or think tank that was trying to develop ideas around this title, The Future, a History. And I think, of course, going back to this idea of LA, it's sort of interesting to consider the city in relation to these various visions or incarnations of the future. Just in addition to that, we shared a conference, didn't we, at the Museum of Modern Art, Los Angeles, where we're on the same panel. And I remember distinctly your presentation about sort of 19th century, maybe 1920s visions of the future, images of the future from the past, The Future, a History. And I've also got another image that we can look at later, which is a little bit more recent, but seems like a sort of retro future as well. So maybe let's just start by talking about this idea of the history of the future and how it ties into an experience of the city. And maybe we could begin by just recounting that that experiment with the V&A and their idea for this exhibition and the kind of discussions that were taking place around that theme.
Yeah, talk about a future without a future.
Yeah, right.
It came and went after years of preparation. They flew everyone over. There must have been about 40 people there. In fact, your school had a whole series of people. There was one fellow, I remember his name as being Brian, I think. Does that make
Brian, was it Brian Dillon?
Yes, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, yeah.
And he said he knew about my stuff and we were talking. But I mean,
he'd been there a while. I think I just started at the RCA at that point, and
yes.
Brian was there for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a whole team. I guess part of it, first of all, if we're dealing with the history of the future, then you have to ask yourself when did this question, which is obviously eschatological too, the future could be the end of the world, right? Which is sort of what California looks like this week, right? In fact, what America feels like this week. But when should we start the narrative? We don't want to Descartes in the future. That doesn't sound right, you know. Post-structuralism in the future. So what happened is I was working on this project that came out and it's continuing, it's ongoing with Marco Vistus, as you know, the imaginary 20th century. Yeah. And he'd seen some of the images and we discovered that around the time of the coming of the 20th century, the obsession with the future, particularly in the United States and elsewhere, was just very intense. And it was actually much more foreboding. The future is always a foreboding place, despite people's hopes for it. They're really hoping with their fingers crossed, that sort of thing, very often. So we think of the 20th century as maybe horrible for all the people it murdered, but also amazing for the future it delivered. The extremely amazing technical makeover, right? I mean, I was watching one of those Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes episodes, and you know, there's so many variations of it, right? Including the sort of post-pop version, right, with Robert Downey Jr. and so on. Yeah. But they're trying to evoke this place, this London, as horse-drawn, you know, and shadowy and bad climate and so on. It's almost like an inversion of something, and lots of whores and screaming and so forth, and it's as if it's before the future really started, you know. And Sherlock Holmes is sort of experimenting in his lab all the time. It's a strange kind of phenomenology. So we got very interested in this, and we were even going to take technologies that never quite happened, and he was going to build them. And I had some images. I'll mention one, and then we could move on. But it was a movie projector, but it was 1890, 5 years before the movies were invented, which is certainly a moment of the future, right? A version of it was in 1893 World's Fair also. So it was starting then, but it was actually not a movie projector. It was a device for the telegraph machine. Telegraph machines looked exactly like movie projectors for quite a while, and they kept advancing them, and they found a way to make the tape work. So to think of this futuristic device being actually just off-the-shelf telegraph machine was so strange. So he said, "Oh, I'll build it," and it got very exciting to me. And then it all fell to pieces. That future stopped. But there's also something strange that's happened with the end of the imperialist hegemony, which seems to have invented a future for us, right? I mean, in 1850 or so, Britain represented 40% of all world trade and was far and away the largest GNP in the world. You could see why it confused them, right, when they lost it. So the future kept drifting away from them just when it was growing for America and Germany. The British were beginning to take a breath and imagining the end of Britain. So there are actually books about the end of Britain, not just the H.G. Wells movies, but there's a whole series about what they call the Great War, but Great War in 1897, not 1914, and so on. So it goes forward and forward and forward, and so this idea of foreboding and this and that. But when the hegemony ceases by the 1970s, when there's no longer a European imperialist super presence, where three colors and you have the world, right? Green for France, pink for Britain, and then, I don't know, some other color.
Because I sort of remember you were talking about the imaginary 20th century, and all of those things came up in your presentation at that conference I mentioned before.
Yes.
It was organized, I think, by Ali Carr, and it was called "How Do We Look?" And it was quite broad, but and also in the panel something kicked off. But anyway, the thing that I remember these images of the future from the past that were of flying machines, but also different modes of travel. And it sort of ties in a little bit to our first discussion around LA infrastructure, where, you know, I think the examples you talked about were these travelators almost, you know, on the pavement. You showed these images of there was a plan in New York, wasn't there, to kind of change the sidewalk for these travelators.
Yes.
This was a sort of image of the future.
There was another image that I showed in Aspen to a lot of architects.
Yeah.
It was filled with architects who looked eager and had good shoes, you know, this kind of look. They looked ready. They looked very prepared, right?
Yeah.
And it was very strange because there was a lot of brown bears running through the campus for some reason up there. So they would look out and there would be a bear staring at them, and they rush in their nice shoes, you know. But I showed an image of a city from 1894.
Yeah.
And I think the image may have been French. It was French or British, but I'm not sure now. Margot would know exactly. But it had a big trench very far down. And instead of having a subway there, it had movable streets. So you'd walk down some steps and the city would be flowing like a river on pavement that moved past you. And when I showed it, I remember everyone sort of audibly gasped at that kind of feeling. And I said, why is that? He said, and they said, it's a good idea. Why didn't it ever happen? It would have been nice if you just walked down and instead of getting a train, you actually had just a moving street. It would be very cool. You just sit there in your bench and then you get there. I mean, why do you have to? Yeah, I mean, the cities are so dense. What's the point of, opening the doors and closing them? Why not just keep it? And so there were some ideas of this future city to try to deal with the density. That was the crisis, and how to deal with the fear of class warfare, and even how to deal with the fact that women might actually assume some power. There were images of the future of women that turned men into little monkeys, and they would hold them and hold their hands, and the little monkeys would look up, and the women were tough and rough, and had mustaches and beards and stuff like that. Yeah, it was really horrible. So, and then there was this fear of aerial warfare.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I distinctly remember a lot of flying machines.
Oh, yes. Yeah, they were obsessed with flying. They thought flying would be sort of like going underwater. That's why they call them airships.
Yeah.
And why the ships looked like fish sometimes. And they were convinced it would be a blimp, that the future was going to be filled with blimps. And when the Zeppelin was invented in 1900, the first thing the Germans did was they took cannons and they shot them down. They wanted to see if they could get a Zeppelin strong enough that it couldn't be shot down so it could blow the hell out of things. So they already think of air warfare. Then every country developed their own Zeppelin outfits. And then suddenly these bicycle makers from Ohio invented a flying machine that seemed so unlikely. And then they had to adjust to that. And in fact, I'm going to do a project, a film, where I'm going to invent a narrative about these blimps and so on. This guy's obsessed with it.
But all of that visual material has a very kind of historical feel, doesn't it? It feels like...
And it's wonderfully antique because it never quite happened,
Yeah. And then we moved to this, I mean, I'm missing out decades and decades here, but
it doesn't matter.
There's a sort of move. I'm just going back to Los Angeles and thinking about, representations of the future, say through Blade Runner, for example, which is set apparently in Los Angeles in 2019, isn't it? And in fact, I remember November 2019, somehow we were talking about it in London, and it was kind of weird because that was the very month, the very year when Blade Runner was set, and it has this very kind of Asian feel.
I know he loved Asian. You know what he said when they asked him what year 2019 really was?
Yeah.
Ridley Scott. And we have to remember it's a British film. It's not a film made by someone who really understood LA. But maybe he did, right?
I think he did. I mean,
that's a moot point, right?
As much as anyone does, really.
Yeah, I mean, and no one understands LA. They just shoot it, right? And no one understands London either, really, for that matter, right? So films are a parallel imaginary, which is strange because they're really places. But they asked him, and he said, "Well, 20 years from now, 20 years ago."
Yeah.
So his model was that it would be a kind of almost like a Philip K. Dick version of a parallel world that was 20 years back, similar to Brazil, which is a future set in the 1950s.
Yeah.
I said, where they never got anything small. They forgot to get transistors.
But I suppose the thing with Blade Runner is that it shows a vision of LA streets of the future.
Yes.
That somehow, I don't know whether they have any relationship to where we are now or not. I don't really think so. Maybe
I think they do in a way. Well, or rule number one, right? Let's set up some rules quickly, right? And based on my spending 612 years looking at the future, part of my business, I've done this and that, talks and written about it.
Yeah.
Number one, the future is always about the present. It doesn't matter what you think. It's always about the present. So that then the first question you ask is, what about the present is in this future? Is it a presentiment of something that could happen? For example, Blade Runner is all about a climate crisis. Well, and then he uses acid rain, typical British response, right? Too much rain.
But it's also about kind of extreme globalization, isn't it?
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
without a doubt. And the dialects of globalization,
Yeah.
and then an extraordinary insight that I don't think he ever repeated. And I don't know where it came from, but his sense was that a growing inequality and a kind of oligarchical architecture,
Mm.
and using layers similar to the film Metropolis.
Mm.
As you go further down, you go down in time. And then as you go further up, you have this big building, the Tyrell Corporation building, which
Yeah.
looks exactly like a cathedral radio from the 1930s.
Yeah.
And in fact, the model was similar to radio.
Art Deco sort of, yeah.
Yeah, so a very odd situation. He was talking about a kind of hierarchy of madness. And
Yeah.
now I've done research about issues of the future now, right? In this book I'm finishing. And
What's the title of the book? What's the title?
Archaeologies of the Present,
Yeah.
the Dismantling of the American Psyche.
Okay.
And essays similar to it appear in this book, Tales of the Floating Class, essays and so forth. And I've given talks on it also. And what seems to have started to happen, like 1982, the year that it came out, there's a book called Deindustrialization or Deindustrializing America. It's written by two professors, and it had one of those moments that professors always dream of. Why doesn't it ever happen to me? Right? It became popular. It became discussed. They had shows about it. Like Zhubov's book on surveillance economy is now a Netflix show. It's like the dream. I don't know why that's so odd that we wish people would misunderstand us on a broad scale. We want to be profoundly misunderstood. But the issue of deindustrialization was saying that levels of inequality were increasing. It wasn't just the offshoring, it was automation and so on. And it was creating a much more hierarchical kind of class structure. And then the model is, what imaginary future would this hierarchy look like? Would it look like totalitarianism, which is basically the model in Brazil, right? Or would it look almost like a kind of noir pre-cyberpunk, because cyberpunk, as the term comes out 2 years later, would it look almost like a dialect of itself, right? Sort of a mishmash, a polyglot, an archipelago of madness, right? Which is close to what Ridley Scott saw. And in some way, I think Ridley Scott had a really interesting instinct. I don't know whether it was the art director, Sid Mead, who was mostly doing art direction. It was this designer of futuristic flying machines, by the way. That was a specialty. And,
they were.
The SYD is how it's spelled. But so it's it's a mishmash, sloppy movie. It's a sloppy masterpiece that seems to have a weird script, because the guy was supposed to be a replicant, but they thought, who's going to want to have a cyborg as the hero, right? Yeah. That was 2 years before Schwarzenegger, right? So they added this crazy voiceover, but he was supposed to be a cyborg who also can die, right? He was supposed to be. It's a whole complicated business, but then you look at the year 1982 as a new way of examining the future, a future that looks more diabolically morbid, and a future that seems to almost be devolving, like those novels by British science fiction writers.
There's a kind of series of dystopias, isn't there?
It's a dystopia where time moves backwards, sideways, and part of it was the end of this imperium.
It's a retro future.
Yeah. So globalization offers us in the West a very gloomy future where all we stand to do is lose, or if we're a white man without a college degree, we trust the most psychotically horrible person. There's this article today that's really great. He said something like, why don't we just simplify it? He said, he's a monster and an asshole. This is why are we making such a fuss over he's mentally ill and we're stuck with it? And don't get too moralized about it. Just try to fix it. But the point is, so many Americans think that getting a lifeboat for only white men only, right, is the solution to the future. Europeans have worried about the future because they keep suicidally murdering themselves over centuries, right? Not lately, but in the past, unless you consider Brexit a kind of a mordant suicidal act, but you could, I suppose. But to the Americans, this whole frontier concept, especially when they thought they were now given the mantle, right, of hegemonic power, to lose that and feel this hierarchy shrinking, the sense of mobility collapsing. I mean, they're having the equivalent result of a collective nervous breakdown. So the future is driving them crazy, and there's something else that happened beside that, which I'll tell you. Want to say something?
But I was just going to say that now more than ever, the future seems entirely uncertain. So, you know, we're in a situation where, you know, everything that we thought might happen has now got a kind of question mark next to it.
Yeah.
And I was saying at the beginning that this whole discussion was, we discussed before how we wanted to do this in the run-up to the American election, and of course that is more, you know, what's happening with that is more shocking than anything, or surprising, or in a way something maybe that you wouldn't predict, but just because perhaps you wouldn't want to. Regardless of all of that, what we're left with is a very uncertain future on so many levels. I don't need to list them all.
Also, the future is now. I was wondering if I should go and bring you the LA Times headline story. Should I go and get it?
Yeah, you could get it. Yeah.
Hold on, I'll be right back.
While you're getting it,
I'll fit exactly what you're talking about. Hold on.
Yeah, I mean, I can carry on.
Just be safe.
You can probably hear me, but we were going to discuss ideas about futurology as well, because I've been working with a futurologist called Ludwig Engel in Berlin.
Okay, ready? Now let's see if I can.
What have you got? Look at that. Okay. Oh, California's climate apocalypse. Amazing.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Fire, heat, pollution. The calamity is no longer in the future. It's here now.
Right. Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah.
That's your talk. So the idea is also, since everything is accelerating.
It's accelerating.
It's happening. It's rushing past us at the moment. And there's also something else that happened very strangely. I was looking at Jane Fonda, who looks like about 22 years old.
What were you doing? What was that about?
Well, she rebuilt her face with better care, but it's still, she's 82 years old. It's a little strange. And there are certain things about her neck or her face or her gestures or her body type, right? That she can't do it, right? With all her exercise tapes and so forth. But we've evolved the plastic surgery of the present. So using plastic surgery for a moment as a strange model, right? That's evolved.
Just to interrupt a second, because we were talking about this last week in terms of scripted space, weren't we?
Yes, same idea. That's right. I said it right. So the idea of plastic surgery of the present.
Cosmetic surgery and makeup, and then you started talking about Baudelaire and his interest.
Oh yes, I remember. But what I'm saying here is that if you live in a plastic surgery of the present, to make at least you have some continuity, I suppose. Which could be done through drugs. It could be done through I don't know, blasting through Netflix. It could be done through living a gig economy life. There are many versions. But what it means effectively is that you have no future or past. They just combine. You only have an extended present, a kind of diegetic present. So you don't want to look young. You just want to look alive.
Yeah.
Because you can't, there is no future and there is no past. So how in a world where we're conditioned for whatever reasons, consumerism, inequality, whatever you might call it, right? If a culture that can't even confront the past or future, and then the future arrives in the present, the mental shock is numbing. It's just So instead of people jumping up and saying, "Oh my God, the house is on fire, California's on fire, our politics are on fire. Uh, how will we ever have a trade deal with anybody?"
Yeah, and how will we ever return to kind of downtown? You know.
Yeah. And then it affects architecture and planning and almost everything all at once. I mean, so the future, the issue is the future is past us now, right? What's happening right as we see it, and our some of the worst things we imagined are happening. I had a professor who once. Yes.
No, carry on. What's this? What were you going to say?
He said the worst experience of his life as a professor, he said, was he was teaching a class on world history, European world history, at the start of the Second World War. And he had to change the syllabus every 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And I remember us saying, in effect, you know you're living in the present when every day feels like a month.
Yeah.
And that sense of compression has happened before, especially to Europeans, but it's not happened to Americans before. And so Americans are in a much deeper state of shock. The Europeans can say, the airlift, I remember that. Oh, after the war, we had no coal, right?
This thing about the present, because you do mention this quite a lot about the future being imagined, how the future is imagined is an image of the present. And but it's also an image of the past, isn't it? And just working with, I was saying while you were gone, I've been working with, I've been speaking to quite a lot, this futurologist, Ludwig Engel, who's based in Berlin, and he was talking about, he like you, has been working with Netflix as well, as a kind of consultant about,
another
what the future
Nicholsworth, right?
They're doing I think he's working on a new kind of series with them that's set in the future in Sweden, and he's advising them on various things. Anyway, he's very clear that the method is not really about coming up with an image or anything like that. It's much more about the way you might consider the future, how you get to consider the future as a concept. And that's about looking at the past and finding a way of plotting that has some kind of connection with the past. So understanding the past is understanding the future.
Yes.
Not a kind of revelation to anyone. But at the same time, it is interesting when we kind of maybe can't rely on the past to think about the future anymore, because the future is quickly becoming so far removed from anything that's happened in the past.
It's very, very strange. I'm quite convinced that looking at 1995 doesn't help us.
No, exactly. And I think that's the
point.
What's interesting, just to say also, I mean, another reference in terms of kind of classic epic movies, and I'm sorry to mention it, but Star Wars, obviously, great American image of the future past. So it's got this again, just like that, it's got this kind of embedded entwined relation between this kind of these legends of the past that come out of a sort of medieval history, fused with an image of the future through these kind of high tech or technological space travel machines. And you have this kind of weird fusion of the two that's just kind of blatant. And most of that fusion is kind of masked, isn't it? But in Star Wars, somehow it's very...
Now, one could ask a question like this. What future do we know to make a future? The only future we know is the past that we're the future of. So a definition, whenever you sort of imagine a future, though the mid-century modernists, were so determined to build something that was not that, right? They didn't want to have any historical, they were ahistoricists, you might say. But still, the only future we have is the past that we're the future of. So you tend to reenact the end of the Roman Empire or the end of the British Empire or World War II again and again and again. You know, so that sort of thing. So the future for a historian is really an interesting subject because it's always about the present and also the past, and some kind of pulse, some kind of false layered present. That's why often it's in layers, you know, the way that people represent it.
Say Los Angeles as a city is a space that considers itself to be, okay, very, very much anticipating the future.
Yes, it does. It's part of its whole sales pitch.
Its sales pitch is about anticipating the future and not being bogged down in the past. It's a kind of like cavalier march, or even kind of gallop into the future, isn't it?
Yeah.
With all guns blazing, and you know, this is the thing about the four ecologies, isn't it? That really describe these various attempts.
Yeah. And it turns out he was partly wrong about so many things, but there's something splendid about the book anyway. You just forgive its imperfections. It's a good book is imperfect. That's what makes it special somehow.
I think now is a good time for us to move to our image for this session. And you won't be surprised to see it. I'm going to share screen. You don't know what I've picked so far. No. And in fact, I should maybe, I won't ask you to guess because I don't think you'll get it.
And as I said another week, it's the building has no relationship to LA, but it's a really good place to assassinate someone in the movies. And they had some very great assassination movies. Clint Eastwood was really with John Malkovich in one.
Yeah.
But it's strange also because it looks so out of place. No matter how you shoot it, it's a little bit like Disney Hall. They're going to put a few $1 billion to make Disney Hall look less ridiculous, and it'll only look more ridiculous because then it'll look like some
Frank Gehry,
powdered donut with special flavors on it. It's going to look more ridiculous when they're done than it does now.
I could have picked that, but I think the thing about the Bonaventure Hotel is that is precisely this weird fusion of a kind of medieval past with a kind of retro sci-fi future, and it's built with this sort of castle-like structure.
Yeah, it's not friendly, is it? It's no wonder they like to kill people in it, right?
Well, it's not friendly, but
don't you think?
It's got this reflective glass, hasn't it? And it's downtown. And
that was the style that evolved in the 70s, and there are lots of photographers love it because they have the distortion and the whole sense of the roll of the camera, and they like to have cars going through it and past it and so on.
But the film is, I mean, it's known for having so many films, 30 or 40 films.
Really? Oh my God.
But the one that springs to mind in terms of sci-fi is actually quite a good film, because a lot of them aren't good, they're kind of B movies, but it's that Jane Bigelow, is it Strange Days?
Strange Days, which also it came just about at the millennium. Yeah. So it had this,
and it's got this firework
register.
Yeah. And it's a symbol of downtown, isn't it? I mean, this is this idea of fortress architecture.
Yeah, I know. And that's around the time when Davis writes about Fortress LA.
Yeah.
And when they did have this idea of gated communities, I also would say it marks the death of mid-century modernism. It's just about the time where they stopped doing this anymore, because it became clear that the public was not that excited to be locked up in their own sort of minimum security environment. You know, it was too much like being imprisoned. And also, the impact of globalization was to make people want a much more street level existence. So it was in London, for example, and in New York and Tribeca and places like that, in the Village earlier, and Soho, that they began to develop an alternative to the Portman example.
But the thing about
that alternative has now replaced the Bonaventure, you might say.
But the thing about the Portman experience from his late 70s, isn't it? I think it's 78, 79. He introduces this idea of, you know, aided trajectories or journeys. So you go through escalators, and then you get these gondolier elevators that go up the outside, well, from the inside to the outside, and make their way to the top. And at the top, I think it's the 38th floor, 36th floor of the Bonaventure Hotel. You leave the gondola, the elevator, and then you are able to go to this revolving cocktail lounge.
No, but the only problem is that what you saw in the cocktail lounge was the undeveloped slums of East LA. So, so I mean, in other words, you looked out into something that had no urban feeling whatsoever. It was funny to have one like that in Berlin too, as you know. I'm sure you've been up it, right? You circulate and see a very odd panorama. And by the way, this panoramic shot refers back to 19th century panoramas and to the imaginary from the early 20th century. So that's why they always have a panoramic floor in all these skyscrapers. It's a it's the last 20th century building. You might say it marks the end of the mid-century modernist sense of omniscience and omnipotence, that this thing could say whatever damn pleases, and it's a signature, not even a place, you know. And we've moved on to another moment, right?
We have moved on to another moment, but this signifies a moment also of imagining a future.
Yeah.
Also,
the Twin Towers in New York are a similar signature, and watching them go down was particularly strange, because they were so symbolic of a city refusing to be a city. And then you look at the Tyrell Tower, which was designed only a few years after this building came up. And you begin to see a parallel statement that so it really is about corporate omnipotence and a kind of feudalistic isolation, or kind of mercantilism, or whatever you want to call it, an isolation from the state and a kind of self-empowered place.
But the very thing that Frederick Jameson talks about when he walks through the building in his, which started off as an essay, then ended up as a chapter in the Postmodernism or the Logic of Late Capitalism, I think in 1994. And that's very recent. It's kind of quite fresh, isn't it, still, from it being built? And
yes,
it's the kind of thing of the past. It's something that needs to be dealt with and understood.
Yes.
And he has this kind of experience of moving through it and seeing it as this, what he says, is kind of fully blown embodiment of global capital.
Yeah, it's fair to say that. And I spent a night there once just to be sure I could see what it was like. And all I remember is how cemented all felt inside. And that from a distance, it looks almost like something out of Oz, right? But up close, it looks more like just cement. You know what I mean?
I mean, we worked on the book together, didn't we? Revisiting the Bonaventure Hotel.
Yes.
And, you know, I think for that piece, you wrote a short endnote about downtown.
Yes.
Kind of Bunker Hill.
I know, yeah, because it was very close to that area that was torn down. Yeah. I mean, there's a certain moment of how to imagine a city. And in some ways, for a long time, there was such an obsession with circulation. If you look at the way this building is with the trees around it, the truth is when you actually see it, you don't see the trees around it. This is one unlikely point of view.
Yeah, you never see it like this, it's true.
And what you see, if you look underneath the trees, you see why the trees are there. They're trying to hide the pedways that were set up because they thought people would want to walk on cement rather than streets. And they found that people had just went into rehab just walking on those pedways, so they gave it up. Chicago has a whole campus that I studied at that was all these pedways. So actually, you get a really strong sense of roads intersecting, right? Yes. It's almost like a rocket launch surrounded by roads, and one instinctively wants to make it look a little bit more rustic, maybe make it look more like Queens or something.
Yeah, he does. is a sort of photo that makes it look like it could be anywhere.
Yeah, but the truth
Sort
is,
of landed in the forest.
there's no, it's completely shrouded
Yeah,
underneath roads, and
yeah,
you're basically feel like you're in a mouse kingdom, you
yeah,
know, in a kind of hive, and that's part of why it absolutely was the wrong message. And they tried for a while to open up shops down below because they noticed that they needed to liven it up. It was a little stale, but the
yeah.
shops looked onto the parking lot. So who wants to go to a store next to a parking lot? Not, I mean, even the shopping mall people don't like that. And
That was
there's
gonna
a
work.
time when malls are being themed and so forth, like the Journey examples and so on. So it had a very strange timing. It's
Yeah,
it's it's almost like the last uh, medieval cathedral, Gothic cathedral, or the it's out of its time, right? If it had been built 20 years earlier, it could have been compared to, so many other buildings.
but
Um,
it
and
continues.
it's postmodern, I guess, but actually, when you look at it, it looks extremely modernist, with
It continues to feature because it is featured in so many movies. I mean, you talked about the Clint Eastwood
yeah.
movie in
That,
the fire with John Malkovich, right?
oh, that which I actually have seen it again lately.
Which
I
is
like that film.
not bad. Yeah,
It's fun, but also the light and then the openness of the plan makes it easy to move equipment around.
and the
It's almost like the Black Maria or something, for like the first
yeah,
movie studio, where you just had glass at the top. It's it's almost like a movie set already.
it is. It's almost designed. I mean, it's as if it was designed as a movie set because
Yeah,
didn't they shoot a television series in there for years and years? I
oh,
can't
they
remember.
did. Yeah, I mean, don't you think that period from the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, many buildings were designed to be photographed rather than experienced? I
Yes.
mean, we know about the Vegas examples, but
Yes.
there are so many, and you seem to like,
But that goes back to this very idea of scripted space, doesn't it? That we were talking about
yes,
last.
yeah, and that's an era, but then it's another era. But this is very much the high rise era moment, and it's almost it almost vaguely reminds you of Tatlin's Tower or something. Like
Yeah.
it stays on these basic shapes. It seems to be a little bit of a dictionary of modernism brought to its very limits,
But
to a
but
kind
that,
of pop
can we just
modernism.
say that this very idea of the image, uh, something designed to appear as an image, but also designed from images, um,
Yes,
and and then designed as a generator of images as well. All these things is there. All these
yeah,
elements, these various categories of image space are there embedded within this building. But what you were talking about in relation to this idea of the panorama from the cocktail lounge is also an idea of looking out. When you look out, you look at the city as an image through this spectacle of a kind of slowly moving panoramic view of the city. Whatever you see, it's still kind of slowly moving, isn't it? In its panoramic, and that idea of the panorama, I think, is you kind of touched on that a little bit. It's incredibly important, isn't it, in terms of
yes,
visualizing
absolutely.
this idea of
Like
visual.
Futurama. Do you remember Futurama from 1939? Which,
Yeah,
of course, we don't remember it, but it's almost standard for all art historians, right? To know about Futurama. The Norman Bell Geddes um, fake helicopter ride over the city of the future.
yeah,
It's supposed to be the River City of 1960, and the River City of 1960 was filled with buildings similar in shape to this, right?
yeah.
And was surrounded by a nest of freeways and
Yeah.
had an airport floating on oil. It was just it was a very weird thing, and it just goes on and on in terms of how this reverberates, because LA does build a stack, and it says Bonaventure's in the stack. Or then you see
But it's now a historical image of the future. Um,
yes, yes,
that
very much
was
so.
about making images of the future that were already kind of dated.
Yes.
And sort of somehow retro or retrospective. But what if that was from the 80s now, jumping ahead, what do we have now that is sort of replacing that
Yes,
image?
I know it's much more modest, isn't it? I mean, it's sort of micro beer places, or I think retrofitting may be the theme for the moment because we're terrified of tearing anything else down, right? And and the infrastructure that's left over from the 20th century is not helping us. It's
But
not good for the ecology. It's not moving fast enough. It keeps taking us to the wrong place. So I think we're actually looking at a future that's trying to reproduce the world before the automobile took over.
mm,
And it depends on the city as to what that means. In Los Angeles, it's kind of before the freeways took over, right?
yeah,
In London, it's a bit earlier, right? In Berlin, they ran out of good decades, so they were stuck with the 20s, so they went with the 20s. but we are almost like 19th century historicists again.
yeah.
So
I think your
cities
point
are going
about the
to
new,
have not so much a retro feeling because the buildings still look as if no one's moved in yet, right? They
yeah,
don't really look old. They're not being saved. They're just being turned into some kind of package. That's it. And then, so we're going to package our cities for a while, but
yeah.
I don't know what the post-pandemic thing will do.
Big difference is something you've identified already before, which is this move. What the Bonaventure represents, as Frederick Jameson puts it so well, is an image of global capital. But
Absolutely.
what,
I think that's true.
what we're saying now is that the image of the future is much more about a kind of multifaceted experience, a multiplicity of cities where you have a kind of locale or a sort of feudalism that
Yes.
we're self-governed, or at least appears to be self-governed, that there's a kind of idea of a kind of new liberalism in these kind of mini centers.
We have a fractured, the nation state's weaker, right? We're both from countries where the nation state is a lot weaker. Right? One of the key terms that I hear over and over again in a very cute way, sort of with a person's second bottle of wine. Oh, it's all an archipelago. Islands. So
Yeah.
we become a kind of mental Indonesia or something like that, or Micronesia might be closer. And
Yeah.
and and
But LA has always
there's
been
a fractioned out quality to these cities now, right?
I mean, in a way, that's what's quite interesting about Los Angeles, because it's always been a multiplicity of city states, hasn't it? I mean, it's made
Yeah,
up.
and it was, but the image, like the Bonaventure is one of the last statements,
Yeah.
was that it was run by oligarchs. It had a singularity to it. It had a single purpose, and it really was a city of circulation. We just rush through, and
Yeah.
it had a. But the irony is that LA is like an archipelago because the way the annexations worked that developed the city, that they had these little towns. There were 65
Together.
little towns that were next to make LA the size it is.
Yeah.
Well, not what happened to London and New York and Paris at the same time, 1880s and afterward. They had big cities to absorb. They got bigger too, but LA really, really sort of is a granola of little villages that was sort of tied together. Sometimes when you see the street numbers, you're going and suddenly it says 1912, then it says 3422. And so what the hell happened to the 1,000? Well, you're in another town and they couldn't move the streets, so they had to sort of change the numbers. I mean, if you follow Sunset Boulevard, you go through the equivalent of, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 towns, I don't know how many. So it's peculiar, but now people want these towns back, I think because they feel so insecure about the present and the future. They want something closer in. It turns out globalization is a misnomer. We didn't globalize, we localized, I guess.
Yeah. People want things on the doorstep, but they also, there's this idea that we were talking about in terms of these different economies, the very notion of a kind of experience economy or transformation economy, a spaces that lend themselves to your own particular set of interests or desires.
Yes.
And those are becoming increasingly diverse and multiple. You know, it's not the old kind of monolithic, singular structures of consumerism.
Yeah.
Again, they're tailored. These experiences are tailored to quite individual and specific requirements.
Mhm.
And spaces will increasingly follow that in
Yes.
probably in the future. And
Supposing
it lends itself quite well to that for the very reasons that you're talking about.
I'm supposing you run out of thread to tailor anything. LA,
That,
the city has a deficit of $400 million next year, and they
yeah,
don't know what to do. If you look at the shock of the Great Depression, right, and how it hit cities, and you look at these 20 cities, which we find so charming, the way the buildings look, the way that the boulevards looked. There was something about the 20s that we find quite compelling, almost every country, right? And then in the 30s, nothing was built, right? Or worse than that. You know, the whole nation state collapsed in some cases. Well, 40s, well, that's World War II, so nothing was built then. So the shock wave of the Great Depression stopped things cold for 25 years.
mm,
And by the time we got into the 60s and 70s, many cities in Europe and the United States had voids of sadness that was so extreme, you almost couldn't believe you were actually in the same country. Um, and now these voids have become sexy, right? But the poverty is even worse. It's just probably the shock that we have means that we're going to have cities um, not so much stand still, but move sideways for quite a long time. And I don't know what that means. It means not just retrofitting, but reuse of different things. And I think the supply chain is going to shrink like crazy. So we're going to see more sort of small level manufacturing in areas that have not experienced that before. I just don't know what the rhythm is going to be like. There'll be fewer restaurants, obviously. You won't have 12 choices, you have 3, right?
you
Um,
think? I don't know. It's impossible to tell. It could go either way, but I think what will happen is that there'll be far more kind of clusters and far less of an interest in an idea of centers. So the idea of the kind of center, you can see immediately that that isn't going to come back in any
yeah,
way.
yeah. So we're gonna archipelagalize or clusterize even more. We're going to granulate further, and I, it's very strange to be talking right now about the future in the year that is going to be the hinge for 12 futures, and we don't know any of them yet. So this will be an interesting document to look at 5 years from now,
I know.
to
I
see
mean, I
how wrong
think
we are, or whether we accidentally. I remember how many times I've dealt with the future, and I come up with 5 or 6 things that could happen, and
yeah.
number 6 is the least likely, so I just mumble it on the way out, right? And it turns out that's the one that happens.
Yeah.
So we're probably accidentally mumbling the right answer, but we're the confusion right now is just overwhelming. Never in our lifetimes have we seen the world in this kind of turmoil. We're just not used to it. We know historically things have happened like this, but this is a level of turmoil that doesn't have to do just with the
I think it
pandemic.
really is, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure people always feel like that, or to a certain extent, but this really is on a different level.
Yes, in other words, they've been getting ready for the end of the world, and then they woke up in the morning and it ended while they were sleeping.
Yeah.
And I can tell you right now that the light outside
Yeah. Well, what
has a kind of yellow. It has well, it varies from
kind
one
of
part of California to the other. You
solution?
couldn't even see the sun yesterday. It just it looked like an egg yolk peeking through a fried egg. It
It's
really,
to do with the fires.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we're not particularly close to
You're
fires.
all close, so that's still affecting you.
The sun looked literally like an egg a yolk of an egg peeking through an omelet, through a
Wow.
fried egg, and it was 12 o'clock in the afternoon in Los Angeles. and it had a kind of strange quality, almost like sour milk. The whole sky, and it had kind of yellow quality, as if it went past its expiration date while you were sleeping, and so you wonder. And then I showed you that headline because in some places it's a reddish sky, other places it's another kind of sky, and the global warming phenomenon has actually happened. We now have a summer that's been predicted for the last 50 years, and we just had a week like those predictions, and a complete isolation from any master planning. So it's very, very strange. It does feel like a science fiction movie.
It does, because this idea of the apocalypse, which, as you said, was the headline on the paper,
yes,
from today. But the apocalypse is also something that hits you from all directions. And
yes,
in a way, that's precisely what we're all going through. We're being hit by a whole number of things in the most kind of catastrophic way at the same time.
yeah. Here's another headline that you can see. You can see that the sea of matches. So the Sierra forest, the forest. Oh, yeah, that's right. I'll fold it out so you can see it more clearly.
Oh yeah.
Does that show up?
No, a bit closer. That's better. Sea of tall matches, Phil's forest up a bit in Sierra. Okay, yeah.
So what that means is that the forest in the Sierras, which is of course where those tall trees are, the redwoods and so on, and actually huge fir trees, they burnt down so much that they look like huge burnt matches, because you can't get close to them. Wow. I can only begin to visualize a forest like that turned into that.
Again, it's that image of a kind of dystopian future that
so what future is that? The amount of land that was burned down, right?
Yeah.
It's the size of the state of New Jersey.
But they're also like those World War One kind of paintings, like kind of Nash paintings, you know, of the bombed out fields with these kind of tree trunks, stubs, these matchsticks, as they put it, in this desolate kind of landscape.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, some people said that it's a space where I can no longer dream. It's a space for all the indicators that might generate mental pictures. It's a space without a mental picture. Yeah. What can you make of a whole forest turned into matchsticks, or a sky where the sun looks like the yolk of an egg peeking through a fried egg. That's kind of I mean, it's strange. Now, things like that happen, but the symbolic representation is that we feel we're looking at the stillness of the economy, the uncertainty about the class structure, not knowing where any of this will land, and then of course wondering when the shoe will drop internationally, because there's going to be an event. There always is. I remember saying about 2 months ago, maybe even 3 months ago, I said, historically speaking, when events like this happen, there's always a rage. I don't know what it'll look like, but there's going to be an acts of rage, because that's what
the rage is there on so many levels, isn't it? It's from, you know, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, all of these various kind of expressions of a kind of deep anger that's been brewing up for decades.
And white panic, I guess also.
White panic, white.
I mean, you may as well just call it what it is. It's not just suprematism. It's not feeling you have any supremacy. So calling it white suprematism is not really catching the spirit of it.
It's a crisis on every single level.
Yeah.
And how cities respond to that is interesting. And, you know, you could argue, I suppose, that LA probably, you know, theoretically, you could say it's quite well placed to reinvent itself, because it's one of the cities that has, as we know from the four ecologies, you know, has been through this process of constant reinvention.
Yes.
uh, in
Yeah.
ways that other cities would have never dared to do. Not always to its credit, or not always to for any success, you know. But at least there has been this idea of reinvention and adaptability, you know,
Yeah.
and so
And
that
then
may
we
prove to be something useful.
should also see a human level, right?
Yeah.
One human level is that people are going to be migrating in and out of cities, and that will tell us something. My guess is that um, LA will become almost more middle class because a certain number of people will just have to escape. They can't, they couldn't possibly maintain themselves. And the same is true of London, I would think.
Yeah.
And and so it won't seem like much at first, but in 10 years, it'll look different. I just don't
Well,
know what that difference
apparently,
means.
you know, people are now moving out of the cities. I mean, I don't know to what extent this is true, but you know, the prices in the countryside, prices outside of London, or just generally outside of cities, are going up because there's greater demand. People realize they can work anywhere. Why would they have to endure the kind of not just the normal crap of the city, but this kind of weird sort of death-like feel of a space that a lot of people just don't want to be in anymore. It's a strange thing. So people are, you know, much like, you know, with 19th century Paris, when the middle classes all moved out of the center to the suburbs, you know, when the
Yes.
whole kind of new push to the suburbs, this is like now to any part of the
Yeah,
countryside.
and I don't even think it's pushing
Very
to the
good.
suburbs. It's pushing to towns that are close by. Do you know what I mean? They don't want to belong to a suburb. Something very powerful is going to come out of all this. And I don't, I mean, London's used to this
But you
in
know,
LA.
in 19th
London's
century
used to this where
Paris,
three people will buy an apartment together. That's an old London trick. But
but
LA has never done that. But LA will have to do that.
in 19th century Paris, that happened because of the fear of revolution. You know, so it was an idea of being kind of safer. The cities became unsafe, and then the whole project of haussmanization was about trying to draw people back into the city. Um, but you know what's happening here is something similar. You know, there's a sense in which it's not really uh, could possibly, who knows, it's not like that now, but it may not be a place where people really want to live, you know,
Yeah. I mean,
which is amazing.
the part of LA where I live is a small town from
Yeah.
1897, and it has these little rolling streets, and they have to make them a special way because it's on a hillside. So one street is high, a side street is higher than the other, so you can hardly get out of your car because the street is tilted slightly, which has a certain charm to it. Is if you can ever get out of your car, right? but
Sure.
but that means it has a layout from about 1900
Yeah.
and that hasn't changed that much. And then it's next to a town of about 200,000 and another town about 180,000. So basically, I'm functioning mostly in a city of about 500,000 people. If you put, or 600,000 people, it's like a hub. It has its own museum areas. It has its own movie theaters. It has um, one or two bookstores still left, and so forth. And then I can hit downtown in about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And so you might say it's a city of maybe 1.5 million people, right? If you stretch it out. But I don't want to live in a city of 5 to 7 million people, or whatever it is that LA really is. I mean, why do I need to go out there? So I don't go to the west side, I go to this side, that, whatever. So in a sense, even inside the city, we're
Yeah.
leaving. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and you're living in an area like that also. You're not
Yeah.
interested in going to the West End. Why should you go to the West End? You're where you are, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's the same. There's
Yeah.
shifting.
So these are all versions of escape, aren't they? We're escaping the monolithic 20th century city, even when we're living in it,
Yeah, exactly.
and
But
and
yeah,
that's going to continue.
I think it will. I mean, let's see. Let's revisit this in 5 years' time and see. But listen,
Yes,
Norman,
absolutely.
because we're running over
Oh,
allotted
I'm sorry.
time. We don't, and I think we've got quite far with this idea of the future history, or the history of the future. And it's tied in with other things we've discussed in terms of infrastructure space, LAPD, the history of the police, but also scripted space. I hope you've been happy with, these themes. They are.
It's great. I have to thank you. It's corny to say that. You can cut it out if you want, but I want to thank you for allowing us to have this conversation extended, because we're actually conducting a discourse that's tremendously interesting to me and useful. So I like it. It's fun.
I think it's great. And let's just continue, because there's plenty more things that, I think we can work on here. And that kind of are things that we've discussed in the past and that are of significance now. So I'll save the next one for next Sunday, and surprise you again then with another.
Yes, absolutely. It makes my Sunday fine, and it makes the end of your weekend fine. So enjoy that. Don't swim the channel this week, I guess. Just relax.
You know what, Norman? I'm still recovering. It's kind of
really.
I thought after, it's over a week now. I thought the first week would be all right. Well, I thought the first week would be hard, but after that I'd be all right. And I'm okay. I'm a lot better than a lot of other people that have got through. God, people having injections in their shoulders and, just really bad injuries and pretty much traumatized by the whole experience. No, I don't have any of that, but just terrible fatigue. It's like, oh my God, I've never felt so tired. You just get these kind of bouts of like terrible fatigue. But it was a great. It's a glimpse
into the future. This is how you'll feel in 25 years.
What I quite like to do, in a weird masochistic way, I'd like to do it again. I don't know why, but there's something. I may get over that. I think I need to get over that.
You're a complicated person, right? There is a history of these guardian men. Like there was this man named Fawcett. There was Percy Fawcett, and then there was his brother. And Percy Fawcett was the one who got lost in looking in the Amazon for Atlantis, and then they made a movie about him years later. He's the original Indiana Jones, but he was a kind of explorer character who wanted to push the limits.
Yeah.
And his brother wrote some of the worst philosophy of the 19th century, and he kept writing it. And some of his books even influenced H.G. Wells because he could do it so much better about air power and air flight. And then one day he was already 60 years old, and he was climbing Mont Blanc.
Yeah.
He didn't know why. He just had to do it.
Hold on, which brother is this? The philosopher or the explorer?
The philosopher. The explorer was already dead. But the brother philosopher they were similar in that way, right?
So hold on, the philosopher was also an explorer.
And well, he was an adventurer. He liked to push limits.
I'm not sure if I'm enjoying this comparison because he sounds anyway, carry on.
Well, but he had a heart attack, and then he climbed to the top anyway, and then he realized he better not do any climbing anymore, so he got an airline pilot's license, and he flew until he was in his 80s.
Oh, really? Well,
so that's kind of a bad story.
There's a lesson there, isn't there? Yeah.
I don't know if there's a lesson there. I think there's a kind of persona that I'm fascinated by that seems to be British as much as anything else, a kind of explorer, adventurer who wants to push limits.
With some bad philosophy.
And you're not like that. No. But by the way, he was famous in his own way. So people didn't know until years after he died that he was really, so don't, it's not about that. But
I'm curious about this. Yeah, when you say that, is it like sort of popular philosophy?
No, well, it was. There were lots of degenerated, like Victor Cousin was this philosopher from 19th century France that was absolutely horrible, but extremely famous, and he was a friend of Guizot, they knew each other, right? In the Metternich era, if I can use that expression.
They encouraged each other to have.
But there was a period in the Edwardian moment where one way you captured the future was by climbing in an impossible way. It was about lost worlds. It was about all kinds of things. You wanted to get the past, right, and like climb a mountain or swim the channel and claim it, almost like you were discovering it. And it seems to me that the British did a lot of this. So I don't know what that's somehow in your DNA.
In my DNA, yeah, something.
But it had a lot to do with exploration to different places and so on.
Yeah.
And they discovered all these. They discovered Troy. That must have been weird to discover Troy. That's like Homer's Troy.
It's funny to say that there's still, these popular explorers, but also it's linked now with endurance. So exploring and endurance continually features in terms of television programs or celebrities. But anyway, let's stop there.